This week, I'm going to be talking about the film Citizen Kane. And Citizen Kane is a 1941 American drama kind of mystery film, and it was directed by Orson Welles, who is a very well known director, and he's known for his amazing camera angles and all of his kind of just the way he directed his films was very significant and very different and unique. And this film was actually nominated for 9 Academy Awards and it won for the best screenplay. So, Citizen Kane is about Charles Foster Kane, who was a very popular newspaper publisher, and this whole film is basically about his life and how from when he was young and then all the way up to his death. But the one sort of interesting thing about this film is that they do it from a kind of different perspective. So it's not just a normal plot line where they start off with, Charles Foster Kane as a child and then just shows his life as he grows up and all of his struggles when he becomes a newspaper publisher. It basically starts out with his death. So it starts out with his death and he's in his home and he is alone and he's in his bed and he has this snow globe in his hand and he says the word rosebud right before he dies, which rosebud is a very well known phrase. And basically, him saying this word, a journalist found out about this, and everyone is very interested on what the word rosebud meant to Kane and what it had to do in his life and why it's significant. So it starts the movie off, and then the journalist goes out and interviews all these people who were in Kane's life and try to figure out what rosebud means and kind of just dissect his life and figure out all of his secrets and kind of just to do a sort of like a research and detective kind of thing on Charles Foster Kane. The interesting thing about this film is the setup and sort of like the timeline. And since it starts with Kane's death, it is very interesting because then it starts going into flashbacks since the journalist is going out and interviewing all these people who are now older because they happen to be, around Kane's age. And he interviews them and it shows them as they start talking to this journalist in the interview, it flashes back to Kane's life, which I found very interesting, and it keeps the film interesting and it's unique and it's different, and it kind of just showcases like Orson Welles' directing style and how unique it was. And it was probably very prominent in this time because films weren't as intricate with their sort of like flashing back and flashing forward and in the present and the past. So I like to think about how people reacted in this time when they see a movie that has so many different kind of storylines and they're all kind of interwoven together, and how it has a lot of flashbacks and all of the important things are shown in kind of different ways rather than just the basic start to finish kind of story. Also, with the whole setup of the film and the directing, the camera angles in this movie were very unique and I thought made the film very it stand out in this time and in American film in general. And it's talked about in our book a lot, the camera angles and how they're used. And I remember specifically there was one where he was young when Kane was a little boy and he got given away to Mr. Thatcher by his parents, and they kind of used the first person point of view, which I thought was very interesting because that's kind of the first time that we've seen that so far. And I'm sure that people probably saw that for the first time in the 1940s as well, where it's from the person looking at Kane through the window, and then it kind of just backs up and it shows his parents inside the house, which is kind of two different locations or settings, and they kind of just like interwove them and show Kane outside and how he can't hear the conversation. And that is mentioned in the book. So it's very significant in the history of film and directing with camera angles. And a lot of other ones I remember in the film where there was a camera in the floorboards and it kind of went up and looking up at Kane in the newspaper building. And I thought that was very interesting because it's basically like you're sort of a bystander. It makes you feel like you're actually in the room, or you're someone spying, or you're trying to listen in on a conversation, which I thought was really interesting because it kind of makes you feel like you're the journalist in the movie who's trying to figure out Kane's life for the significance of this final word that he said. So I think that the camera angles were fantastic with the whole kind of making you feel like you're actually a part of the story and you're kind of in Charles' life and you're kind of watching it as it goes on, which I thought was one of my favorite parts. This movie, I think, is very prominent still today just because it kind of addresses a lot of issues that have been going on in many eras, in every single era so far from the 1940s. When Kane runs for the governor, it kind of reminds me of our political situation now, and kind of just, it's someone who was very popular, well known, and, he's involved in the newspaper business, so there's a lot of gossiping, and kind of that's, what he does with the newspaper business, and then he goes into a political role, and it kind of just shows how he just fed off of this power that he was given from being this well-known newspaper publisher, and that gives him this feeling that everything that he publishes and everything that he has in his newspapers and his opinions are all correct. And it kind of shows that throughout his life that his ego and his power, this power that he was given, he gets power hungry, and it kind of showcases how he drove everyone away in his life and how he had a lot of issues with his second wife, and which I thought was very interesting. Going off of him and his second wife, they showed a lot of interesting things with their relationship. A lot of his relationships, I like how they kind of put that into the movie, where especially with some of the camera angles that they used, like I said before about the camera angles, and just kind of with the cutting of the movie. I remember where him and his wife Susan would be eating breakfast in the morning and they would be reading the newspaper. And when they first got married, they would be sitting next to each other at the table and she would be on his side. And then when their marriage started to get a little rocky and she kind of realized who he was becoming, she sat on the opposite side of the table and then started reading the newspaper that was the competition of Kane's newspaper, which I thought was very significant, and it might have been a little detail that people who watch it for the first time don't really notice. And I think that that's very interesting that Orson Welles kind of put little things in that you don't really notice and right away, which I think is very interesting. And one of my favorite things in films is when there's things that you have to go back and kind of watch again, or when you rewatch kind of like a YouTube video about the film, it makes you realize things that you didn't actually notice in the first time watching it, which I think makes the film more interesting and makes me kind of want to watch it again and think about it on a deeper level. The ending of this film was very well put together, and I thought that it made the whole film just better than it already was. And with the ending being the journalist never actually figured out what Rosebud meant, and at the very end they are burning all of the things that Kane had owned and just a bunch of miscellaneous things, and they're burning most of these things, and they end up burning a sled that says Rosebud on it, which was Charles Foster Kane's sled from when he was young, when he was playing in the yard when his parents gave him away. So I thought that was very interesting. It tied the whole thing together, and you have to really watch the entire film all the way to the end to actually figure out what Rosebud meant. And I think it's just, the movie is very advanced in the ending, with the characters in the film not actually knowing what Rosebud meant, and you as the viewer do know, and they will never find out, which I find very interesting and fascinating as well. And the ending is just very dramatic with the music, and the music played a very key role in the film as well. And just with the kind of tying everything together as the camera moves back and it shows, Kane's house and the gate that says K on it, which I thought was just very significant, and just the burning of the fire going up into the sky, which kind of just ties all together with the beginning of Kane's death and, his spirit, and if, he would to go to heaven or something like that, his spirit kind of just being lifted and as death, and then at the end, this very significant thing burning and the smoke going up as well. So I just thought that was a good symbol at the ending to tie it all together. So overall, I really enjoyed the film. I think it's very interesting, and especially how it's still prominent today and can be prominent probably for a very long time, which I think makes the film even better. So overall, I thought it was a really good film.